Hello everyone and welcome to the 2-3 preview video. Today we will be, or in this module I should say, we will be looking at the common things that you probably think of when you think of sustainability. So far in 2.1 and 2.2 we actually focused on maybe the unusual part of sustainability, the thing you don't think of right away, and that is social justice and inequality amongst people and how that can affect the environment or people's relationship to the environment, how we define people as natural, not stereotypes, and limits them, how people who live in poverty in our own country or in other parts of the world oftentimes sustain the worst environmental problems because they have less political power, less money to fight back, right? And they also just kind of have to scrap for jobs and therefore will put up with the pollution that those jobs bring with them. What we're going to do for this module is switch back to what I think most of you probably think of when you think of sustainability: water, food, overpopulation, agriculture, droughts, these types of things, right? And our 2.1 reading dealt with these as well, but we're going to focus on these for this module. All this is to say that our first reading is going to kind of set the pace and show us why societies fail. This is by Jared Diamond, a really renowned scientific ecological author of Guns, Germs, and Steel. That's probably his most famous book. It talks about why modern societies survived. Now he's looking at something different in this essay based on his book Collapse, and he has a TED Talk as well. He and his students tried to figure out in a course that he taught at UCLA, why do societies collapse? And what he learned from his students is they had a lot of really good questions that were unanswered, and he and his students then dove deeper in the material to try to figure all this out. And so you can read this as a list of reasons why societies in the past have collapsed. Of course, this is things that we should look out for in the modern day as well. Even if our world is different, our use of resources and the way we use them appropriately or inappropriately will be very much inside of this pattern. So look for the pattern of why they collapse. But maybe here's the bigger issue. Look at what the societies could have done but did not. In order to keep their society, their civilization going. He's got a nice list of the reasons that, say, leaders or citizens ignore the warning signs. So what are the warning signs, but also why do people ignore them? Why do leaders ignore them? Those are the two things you want to do. What are the reasons for the collapse? Why do we ignore the early warning signs? If you do that, you're going to be a smart cookie, right? You're going to know all these things. And that's going to be useful for this course, but also in life. One thing we'll do, of course, is turn those into reading strategies and look for them, in the novel that we use at the end of the course. But also you can use those when you get out into life, right? And you're starting to say, am I building a sustainable system here? Or am I overlooking some of the early warning signs? And this could be whether you're working with something environmental or just inside of an organization that you're working for or something like this. So you're going to read that. After that, I've got you slated to do some online readings. And I've put all of the online readings on our D2L homepage rather than in the module. It's just the links work better on the homepage for some reason. I don't understand. But you'll have an easier time here. So I put all of them here, and they're all going to be basically right in a row. You've got readings 1, 2, and 3. I know that looks like a lot. These are all incredibly short. You've got a really interesting statement after we learn about societal collapse, and we'll save that as reading strategies and things we can use to analyze the world or what's happening. A really interesting issue is water a human right? So we're going to spend some time learning about water here. In fact, everything is linked to water if you take a look. So it all starts with, like, is water a human right, or can it be owned? Should we have to buy it? Should cities be able to give it to the way that it's typically organized in the US? As you can imagine, in the rest of the world where there's water shortages, there have been some serious questions coming up about who owns the water that's in the earth technically. Does it belong to the landowner? Can a corporation buy it upriver and use it all and then basically starve out, so to speak, all the citizens, the farmers, the other companies downriver? And so this is a major issue in drier areas of the world, including in the Southwest United States. There are towns in Texas that are suing each other for the water that's underneath, because larger cities in Texas are sort of stealing from the smaller towns who don't have as much political power as well. So this is already happening right here at home, so to speak. You're going to get some really interesting readings on what happens when corporations move in to modernize the economy of a town. We've talked about this in the past. And this isn't so different than what we read in the Ansel Dua essay, which also dealt with Mexican culture and the way that the modern economy favored the U.S. and didn't work well for the local Mexican population. We're going to see that here as well, but in the realm of water. And the Mexican town gets jobs, but it loses all of its water, and it turns out it has nothing but Coke to drink, and there are some problems with that. So please read this. After that, then I thought, just for fun, so to speak, I would let you read what Coca-Cola said about this. This was a very high-profile incident that made its way in the major newspapers across the U.S. This Mexican town became sort of an emblem of everything that was wrong with Coca-Cola's plan. And Coca-Cola has done this elsewhere. It did this in India and other places in the world too, where there's a water shortage. And it can never be totally given or owned by Coca-Cola, because it's hard to tell where all the water's going as weather patterns change. But locals believe this, and there seems to be some evidence. And so we'll see what Coca-Cola has to say about all of this in their statement. I've got some reading questions to support, but as you can imagine, the main thing we want to look at is Coca-Cola accepting responsibility? What type of narratives are they using to frame themselves, maybe as apologetic, or maybe as not responsible, or maybe as being sort of helping this town, the economic savior of this town, the civilizer of this town that brings it into the modern age, right? So see what you like and don't like about Coca-Cola's statement. In many ways, I forgot to say this, but these readings now are more about you. You'll notice that none of these are literary readings, but we're loading ourselves up with ideas, and I'm trying to show you some things that are going on out there in the world. If you're not familiar with them, right? You may know about other things that I don't know about, and that is fantastic. I'm just trying to show you some things linked to water, and these aren't isolated incidents, but common patterns rather. So is water a human right? What happens when corporations move to town and start taking this? Now we'll move into videos. So the Water Can't Be Free video, fascinating video by, I think, a former chairman of Nestle, who bottles a lot of water around the world. He's got a really interesting idea about water. He says water can't be free. But here's the thing. For whom and why, right? Those are the things you've got to listen for. So make sure you turn to your reading packet so you really understand his argument. One thing I want you to look at is the YouTube comments. This is just off of YouTube, a video from The Big Think, I think it's called. A lot of people wrote down, oh, now I know what the devil looks like. I've seen him in the flesh right here on YouTube, talking about water not being free. Do those people, did they listen to his argument closely enough? Be careful not to just think he's saying awful things. What is good about his argument and what is bad about it, right? How is he linking water back to being a human right in some way? Or is he not? Is he saying that water is not a human right and it can be owned and given to the largest corporations like Nestle, whom he chairs? From there, then, we'll turn, perhaps ironically, to something closer to home, though, how Nestle makes billions bottling free water in Michigan, not so far from where we live, of course. And watch this and see how that works, what happens when a corporation moves to town. In America, not so different than in Mexico, right? You see corporate power at its best or worst. And then to close it all off, Cape Town is running out of water. Cape Town, South Africa. The video is a bit older in that the drought is over and the water has returned, but you'll see what happens. This has more to do with climate change and with ice packs that normally give water disappearing. And so you see what happens when a major international city runs out of water. And you'll just see from the video, it's kind of scary. And so I want you to read this as well, and you've got some questions to support your reading there. You can see how they dealt with essentially a water shortage. Now, all three of these videos are all about 10 minutes long or so. So have your reading packet out, and as you listen to them, be jotting down answers to your questions, just like you would if you were reading. The last thing you've got, selections from Michael Pollan's Omnivore's Dilemma on, rather than water, on our food supply and industrial food supply in America. And so this looks at where your meat comes from. And it gives you enough background that I think I don't need to give you too much, but if we were to read all of Omnivore's Dilemma, a very famous book, it opens up with sort of a history of corn in the U.S. and shows that corn is big money. First of all, it's a huge industry. You can almost think of it like the oil industry. Lots of money behind it that's given to politicians to make sure that certain laws are passed that are favorable to companies that make billions of money selling dollars selling corn. Okay, so that's sort of where the book opens. And it also shows that corn is in almost everything we have. corn is wildly successful from an evolutionary viewpoint because it's everywhere. Think of our own Midwest. But it's made into all different types of sugar substitutes that find their way into things like Coca-Cola or your corn chips or all of these type of things. But it acts as a sugar in the body and is, of course, responsible for, or partly responsible for, the obesity epidemic. We use corn for fuel. We use corn in all different sorts of ways in our society because we have an abundance of it, right? So that's kind of where we're starting this. The way corn appears in the essay that you'll be reading, where Pollen goes into a stockyard and visits some cattle that will, of course, become meat, will become hamburger. They are fed corn, and it's not good for them to be fed corn. Cows are supposed to eat grass and hay. But because we have so much corn, and because it makes them larger and makes them develop faster, we feed them corn, which then they become sick, and we have to put various medications into them to keep them healthy, but that finds its way into the meat. And so that's kind of something that's discussed earlier in a sort of the context for what's on his mind when he goes into this stockyard that raises beef. And we can see what happens when we remove the family farm and instead rely on the industrial food sector to supply factories, basically meat factories, while the animals are still alive, right? We can see how they live and what they're fed and how healthy they may be. This could also be seen as a piece on animal rights. You'll see how the animals live, and it isn't always conducive to their own health or happiness if you are a believer in animal rights. So you could connect this reading to that as well. So you have some questions to support you. And again, this is more for you. And what are your personal beliefs on not only water as a human right? If we want to talk about water for a minute, who should control water? Should governments regulate it? Can it be bought and owned? How do we make sure that citizens get it? Should everybody get enough? What would enough be? What would the uses be? So these questions will be answered, but I want you thinking of those issues. Who's in charge of water? Right? And is it a human right? And we could kind of ask the same for the food supply, right? Pollen points out some problems more to do with animal rights and probably human health than anything else. And then the political power of the corn industry and the beef industry behind that. But it's asking kind of the same questions. What is our right to healthy food? What are the rights that animals have to live sort of a decent life that will be healthy for them, but might also increase our own health when they become our food, right? So we're driven back to ecological thinking here. Clearly, if you're in a feedlot with thousands of cows, it's sort of an ecological disaster, and you'll see that in Pollen's reading as well, because that many animals aren't meant to be packed into a small space. The waste can't be reused in the way that it's supposed to be in a healthy ecological system. So we can read this through an ecological lens or a lens of sustainability as well. Can this type of industrial food sustain our society? We can link it to social justice like animal rights and those things as well. So look for any distortions of the ecosystem. And that could be human health, it could be animal health, it could be the local effects and pollution that are created by the industrial food sector, the beef in this case. So look for those type of things. And as always, you've got lots of reading questions to go through here. And in the end, I'm interested too, how do you feel about all this? Does this bother you? What do you put into your body? What are your limits or values on not only water, but on food, and what you put into your body, and maybe what we should be putting into the human body in general in our very modern industrial age, where water and food are part of the industrial complex and not just part of the ecosystem anymore, right? So there you go, everything you need to know about this module on sustainability. Have fun, and I'm going to do some reading. We'll see you soon.